Welcome to the Southern California Newsmaker Series. Today's topic is Advancing Racial Equality in Government. What's next? Before we start, I have just a couple housekeeping notes that I want to provide, and that is that the attendees today are muted, but will have the ability to ask questions or use the chat. We do have people monitoring that, and we will try to get to any questions that they have. We are also videotaping this, and this tape will be made available to the attendees as well as it will be posted on the Southern California News Group YouTube channel. So with that, I would like to introduce Frank Pine, who is the executive editor at the Southern California News Group. Frank, take it away.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. And on behalf of the Southern California News Group, I want to welcome and thank you for participating in today's virtual forum. Social justice and racial equity are matters of immediate concern to all of us, and we have not just an opportunity, but an obligation to address those issues. And our discussion today will focus on how we can best collaborate to those ends. As local news media, our mission is not just to inform the public, but also to facilitate public discourse and to promote democracy. So we're very pleased to be hosting this event today in partnership with UC Riverside's Center for Social Innovation and Southern California Associated Governments. Again, I want to thank you for being here today and for participating in this event. Now I'd like to introduce to you my friend Karthick Ramakrishnan. Karthick is a professor of public policy and political science at UC Riverside, and he is also director of UCR's Center for Social Innovation. Karthick?
Thank you, Frank, and so great to continue this partnership with the Southern California News Group. When we started the SoCal Policy Forum just about a year ago, it was with this vision of not only speaking to particular parts of Southern California, but with the platform of the news group to have a Southern California-wide conversation. It was always our intent, in fact, before COVID hit, to do something with SCAG related to transportation, but that fell by the wayside. And given not only COVID, but what we've seen over the last few months on racial equity and the advancements being made with our community partners and many local governments wanting to move in this direction, we thought that this would be an incredible opportunity to do so. Really honored to be here with all of you, and especially with Rex Richardson, president of SCAG, who'll be offering welcoming remarks. Just really inspiring to see the example that SCAG is providing for jurisdictions throughout the country, but also jurisdictions within the SCAG membership. We hope that this will be the beginning of a series of public conversations that will help SCAG, as well as its various member jurisdictions and organizations to move forward in partnership with community and with the public and with researchers in the important work ahead. So thank you, and I turn it over to Rex Richardson.
Thank you, Karthick. My name is Rex Richardson. I have the honor of serving as president of Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG. SCAG's a metropolitan planning organization representing 6 Southern California counties within the Southern California region, about 19 million people, representing 191 cities. We're responsible for the development of the region's long-range regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's Southern California Policy Forum, and it's a conversation on racial equity in government. And it's a really important time in our region, in our state, in our nation. We face a global pandemic, and we're still adjusting to its implications. We still are facing a housing crisis that we find is intensified. We face unprecedented levels of unemployment and longest lines in our regional food bank in our region's history. And after bearing witness to the murder of George Floyd, yet another unarmed Black man killed by law enforcement, there's been a sweeping response across the nation, really raising their voices, say that there must be change. This is something I call the racial equity mandate. We're looking at the culmination of urgent national conversation about the insidious nature of racism, economic equity, and social justice. And in light of the pandemic, we need to act today, but we also need to provide a vision for the future. And make no mistake, there's no going back to the way things were before COVID-19. This is about charting a new course for the future. We see that COVID-19 has hit disadvantaged communities the hardest. And without their participation, without centering our plans on their experiences, our recovery will be an even more tenuous one. Equitable recovery of our transportation system, especially transit, is one key to an effective, sustainable recovery. And part of our commitment is to listen, to learn from community experiences, to inform our planning efforts, and to work with partner agencies. And it's crucial that we communicate and strategize together as a region to restore our economy and to ensure our region has the resources needed to recover. In the weeks and months ahead, we have a unique opportunity to fundamentally change systems and our process to become more inclusive, more equitable, and more effective for everyone. I know we can do just that. So thank you all for being here with us today. And again, on behalf of SCAG, I bid you welcome.
Thank you so much, Rex. So well said. Now we're going to show you a short video, and then we're going to move into our first discussion topic.
In this vein, in this effort, not only will this community continue to improve, but I'm most hopeful that we're going to leave a brighter future and brighter opportunities that are expanded for those who are coming behind us. Pushing racism as a public health crisis in the county of San Bernardino was intentional, and it was important for us to really lift that. As we said on June 2nd, when we first approached the board, and then even ultimately on June 23rd, when they actually passed the resolution and declared racism as a public health crisis, we saw it as an initial step in recognizing that there's a problem that we really are calling a crisis. May 25th, America saw, and we all experienced what we have been experiencing for quite some time in this country. And George Floyd signaled for us that we have a deep, deep problem in this country as it relates to race relations. Not only just in the Inland Empire, but really across the world. Man, I'm excited. Number one, just in my own community, to see these young, what I call young lions and young lionesses who have come alive. CSI, man, has just been a tremendous partner. And these kinds of partnerships are needed and necessary. And the fact that you intentionally, as an organization, as a university, as a research department, as political scientists, reached out to us, man, that's phenomenal.
Okay, so maybe I'll take over as MC then. So next we have a panel led by, moderated by Deepa Bharath, and featuring Pastor Sam Casey. And is it Rex on this panel as well, Deepa?
No, it's Councilwoman Jacinto.
Oh, Councilwoman Jacinto, that's right.
Yes, yes.
Apologies.
Yeah. Hi, so welcome to the first discussion of the morning. My name is Deepa Bharath. I'm a reporter for the Southern California News Group. And with me today are Councilwoman Megan Jacinto from the city of Coachella, and Pastor Sam Casey, whom you just saw in the video today, Executive Director of Congregations United for Prophetic Engagement, otherwise known as COPE. Welcome, Pastor Casey and Councilwoman Jacinto. My first question is for Pastor Casey. How did this new incarnation of the civil rights movement come about? And how do you think it's manifested in San Bernardino County?
First of all, thank you so much for allowing us to participate. I think this new incarnation of the civil rights movement and activism that we're seeing in San Bernardino County has been ongoing. I don't think it has ever ceased. I just think what we experienced on May 25th with George Floyd's incident has just been a combination of challenges and situations that have finally come to a head. And we saw it as a moment to capitalize and continue to build on movements that have already been taking place in San Bernardino County, and really push the county to do something very courageous,
in the state of California. It was their first time. We were the very first county, I meant to say, to actually declare racism as a public health crisis. And because of that, I think it has afforded us the opportunity to really continue to lead the movement in our region.
That's wonderful. Councilwoman Jacinto, what do you think has changed in the last few years, given this long history of the civil rights struggle, in your opinion?
Well, I echo some of Pastor Casey's sentiments, actually all of them, but specifically the framework of recognizing the civil rights struggle as having really always existed throughout the existence of our country, and even before the country was founded. And so it's over time, the civil rights movement has taken different forms. And I think what we're seeing most recently, and specifically in the last few months, is a big response to what was a response to, our first Black president, and what was for a short period of time deemed to be post-racial.
Absolutely.
And there was a phase where a lot of people started feeling like racism no longer existed, and race was no longer an issue, and we shouldn't talk about it. And the reaction was that I'm getting. Can everyone hear me? I'm getting a little.
Yeah, if you can maybe come closer to wherever the mic is on your device, that would be great.
Maybe my mic input is bad. The reaction to that. The first Black president was then the current president, and all of the hatred and sort of the opening of biased attitudes that were quieted for the past many years. And that has then led to sort of a reckoning and also a recognition of how deeply rooted racism is in our country. And I think it's making it finally visible and obvious to people who previously were comfortable ignoring those facts or not acting on them. A lot of people now feel like there's no other option but to act, and there's no other point of view other than to see the racism and the inequities that are impacting people. That for me is a big change. Along with that is the improvements in representation, because representation matters so much. And even though we're not even anywhere close to where we need to be yet, we know that little by little we're achieving these gains and having more representative leadership at all levels, and that helps us change the policies.
Thank you. Reverend Casey, what is the difference between what's going on right now in the civil rights movement? I mean, civil rights is not a new concept. I mean,
right, absolutely.
But and so what's the difference between this moment and what's been going on, the movement you've led for so long? And could you also talk about the involvement of the younger generations, which you mentioned in the video, and how there's room for the older and newer generations in this movement?
Absolutely. I think what we're witnessing at this time is really, as I stated earlier, a continuance of the work. The only thing that has really changed, or really would say advanced in the work, is the fact that now it's in real time. Social media has really advanced the cause of, sometimes for the good and even sometimes for the bad, but most importantly for the good, in the sense that organizing now around civil unrest and different issues that have taken place in these last few months, and really over the last few years, going all the way back to Trayvon Martin and the like, and we can run a list of marching up to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. That social media has really, in the invention of the cell phone camera, has really advanced some of these movements to really give concrete evidence, regardless of what side of the aisle you stand on, as it relates to trying to prove innocence or guilt prior to it even making to the courtroom. But we've been able to see these things take place in real time. And then what's really exciting is just to see the young people that I mentioned in the video, and I don't mean no offense by it, by calling them young lions and young lioness, but really seeing them come together. Dr. Karthick and I joke about this all the time, about an old cartoon he and I both grew up on, and we share it in common, called Voltron. And it was the coming together of these lions, male and female, that work together to bring about justice in any situation that they found themselves in. And they work collectively, they work together. And these young people, the youth, have come alive. And it's not the first time. This is the challenge at times. I think we have very short-term memory. That in the 60s, college students who were sitting at lunch counters. Representative John Lewis led some of those movements at that time as a high schooler and even as a college student, more importantly. So when we talk about this resurgence of young people, I believe that they're just tired and sick and tired of seeing some of the injustices that have taken place. And what's important about providing space for them intergenerationally, I, as a mid-adult Black male, sit in the middle between the youth that are coming and the older generation, that is really who show stand up on, is really to try to provide space for them. We may not always agree on approaches. The young lions and lioness think we move too slow. They're organizing through Instagram and organizing through social media platforms. While we're a team, we'll still be sitting around tables. But young people don't even have to meet face to face to strategize. They're strategizing through one another's direct message inboxes and mobilizing masses of young people to show up and fight. And so we've got to find a way to really bridge this intergenerational, I don't want to call it a challenge, but really an opportunity, because if not, we'll splinter this movement if we don't begin to work together and find ways really to hand off the baton of that leadership to the next generation with grace and patience.
And, Pastor Casey, you also talked about the racism as a public health crisis. San Bernardino County was the first to do that in the nation, especially after George Floyd's death. Councilwoman Jacinto, what does it mean for the government to make that declaration that racism is a public health crisis? And how do you see those issues manifest in your city?
Well, first of all, a lot of the attention that's given to racism is focused sort of on individual attitudes and incidents between people, which are really important, important aspects of racism, but they're not the root or the cause. And I think it's difficult to call attention or to get movement from otherwise unengaged people, and specifically white people, on the concept that, racist policies and racism in institutions and systems is what is driving all of these disparities. So for me, the fact that now many jurisdictions, including the city of Coachella and SCAG and San Bernardino County, have made this declaration a recognition that racism is a public health crisis, and not only that, a human rights crisis, I think it's a very important step, because it's finally, at the level of government, a recognition that there's work that must be done to correct these disparities at the government level and focused on racism. Racism's not a side issue. It's not something we can ignore. It's not something we can only talk about in private. It's something that's driving these disparities. And yes, it has been an important step in our city. We're a city that provides some workforce to the Coachella Valley, which is known for its resorts and golf courses and music festivals. Where it's a very segregated valley, and our community is 97% Latino, amongst those many indigenous.
Councilman, can't hear you again, so if you could move closer to the microphone, sorry.
Okay. Not sure what's wrong with my city device here, but we are a community that in Coachella that is the workforce city, and it's you know, 97% Latino with a median income, I think in the high 20,000s. So in comparing that to our wealthier neighbors, we see, you know, and we feel the impacts of racist policies over the years. And so as a city, sometimes in this type of demographic, there can be a tendency to say, well, you know, we're a Latino city, we have progressive politics, we already have it figured out, but we don't. Sometimes we're also perpetuating those same policies because we're not looking deeply enough at the way they impact our residents. So this step of the declaration, which also included the formation of an action committee to address racial inequity, is very important in our city. And we hope that our neighboring jurisdictions and every level of government will consider making this explicit move toward dismantling racist policies that will then filter down to everyone else.
We have about 3 or 4 minutes in this segment, and I do want to get to a couple more questions. So Pastor Casey, can you talk a little bit about Black-led organizations and the challenges they've been facing, and how the Black Equity Initiative might help to make this a more sustainable movement?
Yes, super excited about what's taking place in the Inland Empire, an initiative being supported by the California Endowment, the Inland Empire Community Foundation, and the Weingart Foundation, to establish a $5 million fund to be raised over the next 24 months for the Black Equity Initiative for Black-led organizations in the Inland Empire. I believe this is an important step in the right direction, given there's even been inequity in funding for Black-led organizations, not only in the Inland Empire, but really across the nation. And it's interesting that when we begin this whole entire conversation, I had an opportunity to be on a panel such as this with the top 15 CEOs of foundations. And the question was asked of me similar, and I, you know, what can we do for Black-led organizations? And my response was, we've been telling you for the last 20 years. And what makes it different now is the fact that I believe there's an opportunity to realize some missteps and some challenges. And granted, Black-led organizations have struggled over the years to really build our capacity to the levels of what some foundations would deem as ready to receive deep funding. But the reality is, if we do not receive that kind of funding, we don't have the opportunity to build our capacity. And capacity is an overused word here. Here's what it is. We need money in order to develop systems and hire staff and build to the levels that would allow us to create change. But here's the reality. We have done it without the resources and still have been effective. But praise be unto God that the resources are now coming, and we're going to be able to continue to make greater change and effectuate the kind of gains that really are going to be needed in this region. So kudos to Weingart, kudos to Endowment. Our program officer is on here, Margarita Luna. Big shout out to her, to Dr. Karthick, and all who's going to contribute to that fund. Listen, if you're a funder on here, get in touch with Margarita Luna or the Inland Empire Community Foundation. We would love your support and participation in the fund.
Wonderful, thank you. Councilwoman Jacinto, how does this fight against anti-Black racism relate to the fight for the rights of other communities of color in the Inland Empire?
That's a really good question, but I have one first. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, much better, thank you.
I think I found the right setting. So yeah, that's a really good and important question, and it's a struggle, again, that's always existed to the benefit of white supremacy, because, you know, communities of color and other communities that have historically suffered, you know, the oppression and the disparities of white supremacy have tended to almost compete against one another. And that, you know, that keeps us divided and prevents us from progressing to form power equal to, or, you know, better than what exists now. In Coachella, you know, we have, like I said, a predominantly Latino city that is, you know, a space of a lot of anti-Black racism as well. And so when, as leaders, we're really explicit about our support of, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, there is some pushback in our city, and we have a lot of work to do in the Latino community and everywhere in recognizing that, you know, supporting one group that has defined itself or that has been defined doesn't cause harm to another group. And you know, if we can help.
Now you're saying something really important and we can't hear you again. I just wanted to point that out. I'm sorry. Sorry to bug you. But, yeah.
Oh, okay. You know, if we support a group that we don't perceive to be our own group, that doesn't harm us. And the same, you know, when that group supports us, it doesn't harm them. What's more important is that, you know, we all recognize that we do have aspects of what we think is our own self-interest that are shared. And in particular, you know, in the context of this discussion, it's a fight against racism and a fight for equal power and equitable resources that have been enjoyed by white communities and particularly white males for all of history. So, you know, we have to share those struggles. We have to unite in those struggles and support one another so that we can all move forward together. And that's how I see it. And a lot of my colleagues do as well, thankfully. But like I said, we still have a lot of work to do in our communities to sort of end the competition or the, you know, who's you know, better off or worse off than each other so that we can move that forward together. Okay.
Yeah, again, we had a little bit of trouble hearing all of it, but thank you. Thank you so much for your response. This is a question for both of you. What do you think are some of the immediate roadblocks or challenges that the Inland Empire faces in terms of achieving racial equity?
I believe number one is going to be the courage of our decision makers. I believe it starts at the top with county board of supervisors, city councils, mayors, superintendents of schools, school teachers. I think it's going to be important for them. Sorry about that. Important for them to lead the way, as well as communities, organizational leaders within the faith community, and organizational leaders and nonprofit, being prepared to have courageous conversation. I think the council lady just spoke to it, and that is having our allies understand your participation is invaluable and is going to be invaluable moving forward, that none of us can no longer remain silent. She said it best, where me participating on immigration issues for undocumented families doesn't take away from me focusing on Black issues, and vice versa when it's time to determine local control funding formula for local school districts. Me advocating for Latino families and Latino families advocating for us for equitable funding, it doesn't take away from anyone. We've got to get rid of this competition and begin to fight and walk together, because if not, we're going to miss an opportunity in this time, and our children are going to suffer behind it if we don't get it right this time.
Those are all really great points that I agree with. Can you hear me?
Very well now, thank you.
The thing is like adjusting itself while I'm talking, so I don't get it. But you know, those are all really great and important points. I think for me, I still look at it as a very long road to get decision makers to the level we need them to be at in order to start dismantling some of the destructive policies and then implementing healthy and beneficial policies for our communities. I know in Riverside County, as an example, you know,
Councilmember, it sounds like you'll probably need, whatever slider you're using, you'll need to hold it, because it is reverting back to whatever mean.
One moment. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm just gonna stare at the microphone levels while I talk. So yeah, I think I'll just repeat a bit of what I was saying in case you didn't hear me. You know, I think it's going to be a very long road for us to get decision makers in the Inland Empire to the level we need them to be at to truly represent and protect communities of color in specific and other groups that have been traditionally left behind. In Riverside County, as an example, the Riverside County supervisors did just recently pass the declaration of racism as a public health crisis, but we know that Riverside County policies and even attitudes are super problematic on many subjects, including in particular the policies of the Riverside County Sheriff. So, you know, there's certain steps that have been very positive and in the right direction, but it's going to be a long road. And we just have to keep doing the work and doing it together, as Pastor Casey said, and making sure that it doesn't stop at these sort of symbolic public events, but that it continues in the policy making and the decision making into the future.
Now, we have just a couple minutes left. I just want to open it up to both our panelists here for any concluding thoughts on this subject.
Ladies first.
I think what I would like to say sort of has to do with support for leadership and new leadership. I, for example, view myself as an outsider to politics, although I am now a council member. And I think a lot of sort of new elected leaders are feeling that way, but those are precisely, in my view, the type of people that we need to support and elect into office so that we would finally have the type of representation that reflects our communities and implements those policies. And I encourage everyone to remember that, you know, as our community leaders move into other and new leadership positions, they still need the support and really push of the community to make sure that they can be successful in doing the things that we need from them. And we need to continue to hold them accountable as well. And
you're a civil rights attorney as well, right? Not a lot of people know. So you have first knowledge of these issues. Pastor Casey.
And I just want to, real quickly, sorry, Pastor, I just also want to give a little shout out to Margarita Luna and the California Endowment, which has implemented as well in our community in Coachella, the Building Healthy Communities sort of framework and system, and kind of commenting to one another, look at us 10 years later and how much we've changed and how much we've accomplished, and what does that tell us about the future? So those type of investments and partnerships are extremely important as well.
I think in closing, the only thing I would like to add is we have an opportunity in this region to really lead the nation, not only lead the state, but really lead the nation. And I think it's going to take the courage, not only of our decision makers, but really of us community residents to really stand up and continue to work together and not return to our silos in separate communities. You know, once this pandemic of COVID-19 is over, I think we have an opportunity to really push decision makers and push the philanthropic community and really push universities to lean in on this moment and really ask and demand for change at all levels, not only at local government, but at the statewide. At the state, we can push for change, and even in the local school districts, pushing for change that really can change the direction that this community is moving in. Here is one way we need to, one area we haven't mentioned that we must push, and that is in our criminal justice system. We must rethink public safety within this region as we take a look at declaring racism a public health crisis. Not that we're attacking law enforcement, that's not what I'm saying, but we have an opportunity in San Bernardino County and certainly in Riverside County's Sheriff's Department to push in ways that we have never pushed before. And that is to restructure how we're funding these local departments when crime is actually on the decline, and really use a racial lens as we fight for justice in dismantling racism in our criminal justice system. And so let's remain vigilant, let's remain courageous, and more importantly, don't walk away from the table when disagreement and tension enters the room. It's just the reality that there's some pain there, and we need to finally address it. And racism for far too long has caused so much pain in this nation. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of hurting, and I'm tired of seeing those around me hurting. So let's be the salve and the panacea that ultimately brings change to this region.
On that very positive note, we're going to end this first discussion here. Thank you so much, Reverend Casey, and thank you, Councilwoman Jacinto, for sharing your thoughts and your insights with us today. I'm going to turn it over to Julie Corlett now. We have 3 polls for you coming up right here.
Yes, we do. Let's see. We'll get the first one up and relaunch. So why don't we give you about 20 seconds? Does everybody see that? Please feel free to go ahead and poll. Very good. Polling's still going on, so I'm going to let you finish. All right, going to give it like 4 more seconds. We're up 75% almost. Yeah, there we go. All right, we're going to end polling. We're going to share those results with you.
Wow, that's great to see. Thank you to SCAG for helping get the word out, and for your members for joining us. Can we get the next poll up?
Yes,
Julie?
we can. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, I think that was right.
Yeah, there it is, right?
Maybe interpret the boomer as boomer or older. There may be people from the greatest generation as well.
Okay, looks like polling stopped. And those are the results.
Wow.
Like,
Okay, and the final poll.
okay, I think we're good there. Those are the results.
Interesting. Thank you, Julie. Now we can move on to the next panel.
Yeah.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Samantha Dunn. I'm a senior editor of premium content and engagement at the Southern California News Group. And this segment is about advancing racial equity in local government. And to talk about this is a man you've already met, Long Beach City Councilman and president of the Southern California Association of Governments, Rex Richardson. And also joining him is Margarita Luna. She is a senior program manager for the California Endowment. She manages the Endowment's Inland Empire grant portfolio, which is focused on improving community health through community engagement in policy and advocacy and system change. Welcome. Before we get into the particulars of everything, I'm just curious, I think our audience might like to know a little bit more about you personally. I'd ask both of you, what motivates you to do the work you're doing of public service at this time?
Thank you so much, Samantha, and thank you all for having me here today. You know, I was actually born and raised in the San Gabriel Valley in a small town called La Puente. And I was born into a family that imbued in me the values of serving and building community, of making a way out of no way, and of leaving the world a better place than I entered it. And so that's really the values that drive me every day to really infuse humanity into philanthropy for the past 13 years and continue to do so through our work at the California Endowment. So, you know, I come from these communities, I have the lived experiences, and so that's what I really intend to do every day at the Endowment, is to really bring the voices of the community. And I know that I'm also far removed from that experience as well. And so really, you know, my role is really to just use the power and privilege that the Endowment gives me to open the door for folks like, you know, Pastor Casey and Felicia Jones and all the folks that are really doing the good work of advancing racial equity in the Inland Empire.
Great, thank you. Rex?
Thanks, Samantha, and very nice to meet you, Margarita. So, you know, I came into public leadership with a deep sense of identity and purpose. 50 years ago this fall, my mother integrated schools in Alabama when she was in 2nd grade. I can trace my lineage to sharecroppers who were former slaves who worked to acquire land. Crosses were burned on their properties when they tried to build stores and build economic independence. I'm an 80s kid. You know, we grew up through the crack epidemic and the war on drugs and over policing in our communities. When I remember, you know, in 10th grade, 11th grade, when my counselors would push me toward military because I didn't meet the profile to go to college and my academics weren't there, when I knew more Black men who had, you know, who had been caught in the criminal justice system or sort of public health issues with HIV/AIDS in the 80s, as opposed to those who had gone to college. And you know, I believe that we have a responsibility to ourselves and to the future generations. Like President Obama said last night, the actions we take now echo through generations. And so, for those reasons, I've always felt a need to sort of serve and represent others and think about how we can make a meaningful difference in the lives of people. So I ran for office when I was 29 in the city of Long Beach, representing North Long Beach. We border Compton, Bellflower, Paramount. It's the largest area within the city, a fifth of the city's population. And we've got deep need, and we've tried our best to get to the table and again, change systems, acknowledge how systems can impact our daily lives, and try to forge a better future. And so that's sort of what's guided and motivated me.
Great, perfect. Thanks, Rex. That's quite enlightening, both of you. Thanks. I think it's fair to say, since we're talking about local government, that historically government has played a huge role in creating and maintaining racial inequity among citizens. What are some of the hallmarks of this racial inequity when we look at our own towns and cities that remain today? Margarita, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so, you know, the Endowment has kicked off our own racial equity journey called Advancing Racial Equity. Even though, you know, the Endowment is made up of mostly people of color, we recognize that the policies and practices that the Endowment ultimately created long ago really weren't made with racial equity in mind, with that lens in mind. And so we're doing the hard work of really looking at ourselves and the ways that we do our own grant making. And so similarly, you know, some of the work that we've done is really learning about the history of racism in this country. The 1619 Project is something that I always talk about, and is something that was homework for us, as well as a number of different books, Decolonizing Wealth, as well as Dr. Kendi's recent book as well, about how to be an anti-racist. Just some homework for you all to consider and think about as you continue to build your own practice around advancing racial equity. What we know is that government in America was designed to manufacture and maintain white supremacy through narratives, through language, through policies, through practices, and essentially rendering it racist, right? That's what we're talking about in terms of structural racism. And so the work that we're all being called to do is to continue to be vigilant and to name it at every turn, to understand and to do the work that, you know, Councilwoman Jacinto was talking about, which is looking at all of our policies, looking at all of our practices, and how do they perpetuate inequity in our communities? How do they actually have impacts in various communities that maybe we don't intend to, but actually do. And we need to really think about what are the root causes of that inequity through just the policies and practices and systems that we put in place. And now, you know, we're talking about government, but everybody needs to do this work. Nonprofits need to do this work. Philanthropy needs to do this work. Everyone needs to do this work because it really is deeply woven through the fabric of this nation.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to have a question about that coordination later, but Rex, I wanted to get to you. Your first act as president of SCAG was the resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. What was interesting to me was that it was not just another call to raise awareness, but it was an imperative to action.
Right.
Can you tell me more about that and why you wanted to launch your presidency with that statement?
Well, a few things. So first, I think it starts with acknowledging systemic racism. We have to acknowledge that it's a systemic issue. Systems are not neutral. They're laced with values of race and gender, from the institution of a system all the way through today. And they're not neutral. If patterns of disparity exist, then the systems are doing exactly what they're designed to do. So it starts with us acknowledging, beginning to design alternative systems and present them as superior models for institutions. SCAG is a regional government. We set examples, we help with long-range planning. It's important that SCAG acknowledge institutional racism and begin to demonstrate through its grant programs, through its modeling, even through the rhetoric and the actions that we take, that as an institution, we should call it out and we should begin making sure that we make changes to the way that we operate as examples for how local cities can begin to acknowledge institutional racism. So in early July, we did that. We adopted the board resolution. It wasn't necessarily easy. You had folks like Councilwoman Beaman, Jacinto, and others speaking out from across the region and sort of defending this as the right side of history. And we need to make sure that we're acknowledging this and that it's not just a political issue, but it's sort of essential. It's an essential standard for local government to address racial equity. And so we began by declaring declaring institutional racism a public health crisis. We vowed to work with partners and others to meaningfully advance justice, equity, diversion, inclusion. This resolution has already had an impact on the way that we work. We put forward a work plan for our first year that'll help guide our organization to be considerate of equity in our planning efforts. It was overwhelmingly approved by regional council. There were a few abstentions, but it was overwhelmingly approved and embraced. And this it also creates a special president's committee on racial equity, and Councilwoman Jacinto is going to sit on that commission, and we're going to help further develop SCAG's response to advance social justice across the agency's activities and initiatives. And so that's what took place. That's what took place there, and you're going to begin to see over time as we begin to chart the regional recovery, how we lace racial equity into those steps to ensure that as we recover, it's inclusive and it's more resilient for everyone.
That leads me to my next question for both of you. Given all this, then, this may sound like such a basic question, but I think it's important to define terms. What does racial equity in local government really mean? What does it look like?
You know, I think what it looks like, it looks like strengthened partnerships with community. What I really appreciate is that a lot of the council folks here are folks from these communities, right? And they really represent these lived experiences that we really want to address. And at the same time, you know, it's really important that we are also making sure that community is organized and really understands, you know, the issues and the possibilities that exist in their own jurisdictions, right? In their own cities. And I would even say unincorporated communities are also just as important to be, you know, engaged in this process as well. So, you know, what was made possible in San Bernardino County, in Riverside County, it's really wonderful that we have political leadership to move that forward. And it didn't happen without the leadership of community moving it all along the way. So there has to be that kind of inside outside, what we call the inside outside game, where there needs to be internal champions and systems, and there needs to be external champions that are helping to, you know, there's accountability that goes both ways, right? And I think that's the way that we advance racial equity is strengthening these partnerships with community members, community residents, as well as community organizations and advocates that are on the ground every day.
Rex?
I'll jump in here. I love that you mentioned, Margarita, the inside-outside game. And we talk about that here in Long Beach. I know that California Endowment has some history in Long Beach as well. When we think about this, I want to center this on the point in time. Mr. George Floyd's tragic death. It happened in Minneapolis. Now, a few years ago, I happened to be in Washington, D.C. at the My Brother's Keeper Summit, sitting alongside on a panel with the mayor of Minneapolis, who was invited by the president to talk about racial equity and the things that they're doing in the city of Minneapolis to embrace equity and boys and men of color and those things. And Minneapolis is not a terrible city. It's slightly smaller than Long Beach. We're very, very similar in terms of demographics and our commitment to equity. But we still saw what took place, what America saw with the murder of Mr. George Floyd. And what that tells you is, if it can happen in Minneapolis, a city that's been applauded on the national stage for its commitment to racial equity, then a situation like that can happen in any American city. And it called on all of us to embrace racial equity and check under the hood, if you would, and reevaluate our own commitment to ensuring that our systems are designed in a way that it values lives in an equitable way. And so how have cities arisen to this moment and met this equity mandate? I think you've seen a disparate sort of, cities are responding differently. I can speak to my city, Long Beach, 500,000 residents, second largest city in the SCAG region, 36th largest city in the nation. Home to a port, home to deep economic divide and segregation as well, where 2 different zip codes, you see 17 years of difference in life expectancy for a 1-year-old, for a child, depending on what zip code you live in within our city. So how are we meeting this moment on this equity mandate? Well, we came forward with a process called the Framework for Racial Reconciliation. And this process wasn't saying that we've achieved reconciliation. We're saying that reconciliation is the goal, and these are the steps that we need to do in order to achieve those goals. Those steps are very in alignment. They're in alignment with the steps that SCAG is taking. The first step was acknowledgement. We passed a resolution acknowledging racism as a public health crisis. The second step was listen. We conducted a listening process over the course of about 2 months to actually a month and a half. Listening, sort of, we're in a pandemic and people are protesting while we can't even do public comment because of a pandemic. We have to open up a formal process of listening and allowing people to share their pain, open the doors to the community. Then convene, we work together with stakeholders and then shape sort of recommendations, best practices that address a number of issues, from advancing sort of alternative forms of policing to economic and health equity, a whole host of issues. And that turned into a plan which just came to City Council, was adopted unanimously, called the Racial Equity Reconciliation Initiative. So this initiative came forward. It's proposed within our budget to fund $3.2 million structurally to support it. And we're taking steps to put a ballot measure for it this November to actually tax oil that's produced in Long Beach to further expand racial equity issues. So all in all, it'll be $5 million structurally committed to racial equity in our city. We've changed our structure of our government as part of this process, taking an Office of Equity that I helped create years ago, moving it directly under the city manager's office, creating a deputy city manager of racial equity to have sort of a lens into every one of the departments and be able to start making changes that create a more inclusive government. So these are examples of what cities can do to change their systems and structures to actually advance racial equity in a meaningful way.
Right. Well, that was actually one of my questions to you. I mean, anything to do with race is often seen as a political issue, right? Advancing an agenda one way or another. I guess my question is, what would you like local council people and planners on the ground to consider as they navigate the nitty-gritty of their own community's political ecosystem, as it were?
I'd say you will be met with folks who say it's race politics. Don't talk about race politics. It's a turnoff. As a Black elected official, who is elected in an area that is not predominantly Black. My area is predominantly Latino, African American. We have Cambodians. We really have to think about what's a smarter proposition, the current system or a system that values everyone. So you really have to think about it from smart proposition, sort of alternative model proposition, a resiliency standpoint, and asset-based framing. So I would say, here's the advice I would give. Start with humanizing people and their experience before you go to disparities. Disparities turn people off. You say, oh, your community faces this educational barrier or that educational barrier. Start with humanizing them. Acknowledge that we know that the problem isn't that we don't have data. The problem is that we don't see the population as human. Commit to processes and narratives that humanize all people. Then acknowledge the ways in which the system does or does not serve those people. I'm going to give you an example, and then I'll pass it to Margarita. We're gonna make up a scenario of a kid named Jose. Jose loves music. He is incredibly great at music. He's a real talent. But there's no presence of art programs in Jose's neighborhood. His parents work 2 jobs that probably can't afford private lessons for Jose. There's a free arts program, but it's across town requiring public transit, which isn't very accessible to Jose. The program in Jose's school has been cut in his neighborhood school, and so Jose has a difficult time staying focused at school, and it reflects in his academic performance. There's thousands of students like Jose with incredible talent, with incredible potential, but the system isn't designed for their success. So the problem is not Jose and Jose's grades. The problem is institutional racism. We focus too much on young boys and young men as if they're the problem, and our focus should be on the system. That's how we disarm folks and are able to talk in a very academic way about how we can change lives for Jose and ensure that it's a better proposition for Jose and everyone's children, everyone's Jose in their town. That's asset-based framing. So that would be my recommendation to leaders.
Great.
Love that.
Yeah, Margarita?
Yeah, absolutely love that. And I would say that, this work also needs to be personal because institutions are made up of people at the end of the day. And so, do your own education, go to Harvard, take that implicit bias test, learn about your own biases so that you can become more aware of actually how they come out in everyday language and everyday decision making and thinking about who's at the table and who shouldn't be. So it's really, I think that the personal work ultimately drives the political work. And so I would encourage everyone to do that interpersonal work.
Great, Margarita, thank you. We are running out of time. I have so many more questions, but I do want to get to this. It seems obvious that large-scale social change requires work from not just government, but from coordination among a broad sector. The collective impact idea of the faith-based organizations and private business, et cetera. How does that coordination happen? And is there a real, I know social scientists have been talking about collective impact, et cetera, for a long time, but is there a real opening now, given the mandate brought by the recent protests? I just wanted your thoughts on that.
I think so. I think absolutely there's not only this mandate, but there's also momentum. And I would say that one of the ways, just an idea of the ways to begin to address this is to build off of the work that Census has done in our community. So Census are very broad tables in many of our communities that include a host of different folks from government representatives to academics. We even have nonprofits, both service delivery and advocacy organizations are at those tables. So why don't we continue to engage them and build off of those engagement efforts through Census to talk about how do we advance racial equity, engage them in a conversation about their experiences around this and their commitment to doing it, not just, once again, interpersonally in their own organizations, but also collectively for the region.
Great. Rex, anything to add before we wrap up?
Sure, 2 things. So to address sort of this moment and folks working together, I would say this: government is great at building institutions. We're not great at tearing down the institutions that we have built. Community organizations are great at exposing flaws and dismantling systems. They are 2 necessary sides of the same coin. You can't be comfortable disrupting and changing systems unless you're comfortable inviting in disruptors to call out and expose where it needs to be improved. And so this is a moment where you have to work together across sectors. The second thing I'll say is it's something that I've said before in terms of how we should understand our role. Racial equity should be it really should be a professional standard in the way that we treat it. We train ourselves to identify and take action around racial equity in the workplace as professionals. If you think about this, the professional standards on sexual harassment 20 years ago and 30 years ago were very different. Maybe the standard was if you maybe don't touch someone or don't get caught saying something yourself, then you'll be fine. You can move up and advance in your government just by being silent. Well, today, the standard has changed. You need to be able, in order to advance in government, advance in your corporate structure, you need to be able to identify sexual harassment and hostile work environments. You have to be able to identify it and be a part of changing that culture. And that's how you advance today. Well, as it relates to racial equity, that's the same way as professionals we should look at it. We should get out of this concept that it's political and you should be neutral, but rather encourage your HR departments to encourage training on how to identify it. What is the protocol if you see an environment or a system or a structure that is not equitable from a racial standpoint? Build those competencies over time, build them, and that's how we will advance racial equity within our institutions. And that's how I'll end. Thank you.
Great. Great. You both have been fantastic. You have to promise to let me interview you again. I'm sorry we're out of time. Now we'll move to our next poll. Julie?
Yep, I'm getting it.
Okay.
You seeing it up?
Not yet.
There we go. Okay, relaunch. There we go. Okay, almost done. There we go. Okay, we'll finish that up and we'll share the results. See the results.
Can you put those results up again? Oh, it is. Okay,
right,
no, it's there. Sorry, I think I might have clicked it on my own screen. Wow, yeah. So, well, there's some short-term work that we can hope to achieve, but this is going to be there for the long haul. Next slide, or the next poll. And this, folks, should help us determine in our next next forum with the SoCal Policy Forum what we want to drill down into more.
Okay, I think we're about done there. Let's get the results. Here's the results.
Yeah, that's very revealing. Thank you, Julie. Let's move to the next. And by the way, these are all going to be recorded.
Okay, I think we're about good there. Here's the results.
Thank you, Julie. And then the final question. So while the last question was asking about personal commitment, this is about your organization's commitment on a similar scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest.
Okay, I think we're about done there. There's the results.
Yeah, so more of a spread there. And I think this shows a lot of the work to be done. My guess is if we had taken this poll 4 or 5 months ago, you probably would not have seen as high commitments, certainly at the organizational level, but still you see the disparity there in terms of, maybe we're preaching to the choir here in terms of who's on the call, but it's not just about preaching to the choir, you need to mobilize the choir too, right? So hopefully that's what we do through forums like these. Thank you, Julie.
Frank, you're up.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, so for our final panel discussion, we're going to talk a little bit about benchmarks and measuring the progress of the initiatives that we're launching. Right now, we have a singular moment and opportunity to affect change. I think probably everybody on this call or in this virtual session has heard the old saw, you have to inspect what you expect. And on that theme, I want to talk a little bit about how we do that. I'm joined in this conversation by Karthick, whom you have already met, and by Kome Ajise. Kome is Executive Director of Southern California Association of Governments. He has 30 years of experience in regional planning, previously served as Chief Deputy Director of Caltrans, where he oversaw, among other things, aeronautics, mass transportation, transportation planning, research innovation, and systems information divisions. So I want to start out by asking you guys, and I'll direct this first question to you, Karthick. What kind of data should we be looking at to better understand the challenges that we face, and how can we measure the impact of changes that we're making?
Thank you, Frank. And I'll say that, especially in our perch as a research center, I think this is something we think about all the time. One conversation that I had recently actually sharpened my thinking in conversation with community, right? And this, I think, shows the benefit of us not thinking of expertise that is something that is just resident, say, in a university or in government, and it's in those interactions with community that this comes about. And so when we're talking about this thing, about how do we measure this, what someone said is, well, let's not just measure it, but maybe we can come up with a kind of, or maybe this is like a co-designed kind of idea, but come up with a rating system. There's nothing that institutions either love or hate more than ratings, right? You see this in terms of schools, you see this in terms of bond ratings, right? But it's not only to come up with indicators, and what I would say with indicators is you can have indicators on process, so on inclusion. Are you actually including different stakeholders in a community? And by stakeholders, it's not just, say, developers and labor unions, but if affected communities, are they meaningfully included? So you can have those kind of process measures that go into a kind of composite measure of equity. You can also look at equity in terms of HR practices within governments, right? And how those are proceeding. That, by the way, is going to be interesting to see with Proposition 16 on the ballot, what that might mean post-November. You can also look at the kind of outputs, the kinds of people that are served and the quality of the service that is being provided, and to collect that data. I think right now, as far as I know, there is no comprehensive scan on how different jurisdictions are doing this. I'm looking over to Kome. I think that's part of SCAG's intent, is to figure out if there's a way to come up with a framework of indicators that can be consistently applied across jurisdictions. But we need to have that consistent collection of that information. But I would say, please, let's also think about these inclusion and process measures, and also the kind of outcomes and output measures to make sure that we have a consistent measurement tool. And then let's come up with a rating system. Let's come up with a rating system. I know we do this for our restaurants, where we have A, B, and C according to how they are complying with public health measures. This is, people say it's not rocket science. There is a way to measure this. There are indicators, and let's keep ourselves honest and accountable. And I would say let's do this within universities as well. There are ways to do this so that we come up with a common set of standards. And I would say, the news group is also part of this, like we can do this so that we're not just telling other people what to do, but we then start holding ourselves to those at least akin standards that can be portable across types of institutions. Oh, you're on mute, Frank.
Kome, any thoughts before we go to the next question?
Well, just real quickly, I think Karthick covered it. First of all, thank you for having us join the Southern California Policy Forum on this very important topic. I think the issue for us is, and Karthick touched on it, is to create, to define equity in ways that are uniform. Because when we talk about equity, you want to be sure everybody around the table is talking about the same things. Oftentimes, you find that people are talking about different things. And so having that, having this standard set and what the goals are that you want to get to goes to what Karthick was talking about in terms of you get what you measure. So if you set goals that are tied to well-honed definitions of what equity is or inequities are, then you have a basis for measuring attainment of those goals. And so what we're looking to do at SCAG, at least given the direction we got from the board, is to develop this equity framework that identifies both qualitative and quantitative indicators that we can then begin to look at as the basis for measurement into the future.
That's a nice segue into the next question I was going to ask. I was going to ask you to talk a little bit about what SCAG is doing and specifically what types of things you plan to measure and how you want to, how you're planning to quantify the success of what you're doing.
Well, I would gladly own up to the fact that I'm not sure I know what we're doing just yet. I think we're just beginning that process, so I don't want to give the impression that we already have it nailed down. Part of that process includes the President's Social Equity Committee that is being formed right now. We're looking for that group to inform our development of the thought on equity going forward and also help inform areas that we might want to take as far as even up to including amending our bylaws at SCAG. It's that deep of a commitment to this process. What we actually had in mind coming into this, which is always interesting, is we've been talking about equity as an issue of focus for us in the agency as we were developing our long-range plan. Equity was a major feature of that. We have a segment in the plan that deals with equity. But we've also talked about issues of health. The health indicators were a strong sense of a reflection of equity issues in our society. And so we were already covering those things. We just hadn't dealt with it at the granular level that we're talking about now. So what we're hoping to do is to take the capacities we already have in terms of data, in terms of understanding and some definitions that we have, begin to refine those, work with minds that will join us on this committee that would help us define further what equity is and bring in other voices than just internal staff and our normal traditional stakeholders, trying to break beyond those to get more quality into the definition of equity. I think that's the beginning steps of what we hope to do. And my sense is, I think the next 6 or 7 months will be a healthy indication of where we're going with the discussion that we're having on equity, because we want to report out to our General Assembly next May on the work of that committee and ultimately create a more lasting game plan for it. I really enjoyed the poll that said this is going to go on for more than 5 years. I think that's the way we see it. This is really going to be part of our lives, I think, for the end of time until we attain those goals ultimately.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Is there particular research that people should be familiar with or that we should be using as we're thinking about what steps to take or what changes are most immediate? Karthick, I guess that will go to you first.
Yeah, and then I'll kind of, as I'm watching the clock, I'll put another couple of points in here as well. Frank. So in the chat box, we talked about GARE, right, Government Alliance for Racial Equity. That's something, that's a framework, and Rex had lifted that up, and he had also mentioned in the chat another, I think it was, I don't know if it was the Urban League or someone else, in terms of REAL, the National League of Cities has an initiative called REAL, the Race Equity and Leadership Initiative. Those have been well honed over time, and so I would encourage people to look at that. Couple of the ideas, I mean, beyond research. So first of all, I think it's thinking about research. I think it's important for us when, and this is something more generally that our center strongly believes in, not only for our region, but in every region in California. Often there's a strong temptation to bring in consultants from the outside, from other parts of the country, build that local capacity, right? Build that capacity so that you strengthen these applied research institutions, you know, and make sure that you're doing it in an equitable way. Think about it as sourcing, right? Just as you would like to have supplier diversity in other things that you do, think about supplier diversity in terms of researchers and who you have. And also in some other ideas that I've heard lifted up that I think we need to bring into this equation, when we think about developer fees, think about the kind of social impact that those developer fees go to. And we think about that in terms of, say, schools or other infrastructure. Let's think about racial equity as maybe one of the kinds of benefits that developer fees can be targeted towards. Also, there's a lot of talk about shovel-ready jobs. One of the ideas that I've been playing around with, it's an op-ed that's still in formation, and Frank, I'll talk to you and others in the news group if you might be interested, is this notion of equity-ready jobs. So it's not just about things being shovel-ready, but do you have the things in place to make sure that it's actually going to lead to equitable outcomes, that it's not just lip service? So I think these are all the kinds of things. It's not just about research, but research that can actually have impact that we need to start implementing right away.
And I don't necessarily assume that we need brand new research. I think there's a lot of work that's been done. We just hadn't really focused on what these things mean. We have data, we have information that is already in place. We have definitions that are in place. So when I suggested defining equity, it's not so much that we're trying to reinvent the wheel. I think it's a matter of coming to terms with what we're really trying to do to give this meaning. And, you know, having, Karthick talked about capacity building. We do a lot of work in various communities that are, you know, traditional planning activities, and we pride ourselves in outreach that we do. But what we are finding, at least from this focus on equity, what we're finding is we don't typically have the right voices at the table. We would have a lot of technical staff at the table from the various jurisdictions and municipalities, but the people that we're actually talking about are not there. You know, we at SCAG, when we reviewed our strategic plan a few years ago, we had talked about this notion of fostering innovative solutions to create best practices. When we revised that, we actually added that affects lives in Southern California. Now, so that was a few years ago. When we now think about it today, we're going to be a little more granular about how you affect those lives. And by doing that, you need to build some capacities to actually have them engaged in the conversation. So I would say it's not so much about spending resources on more research. It's probably spending more resources on capacity building to bring folks to the conversation that don't typically inform us on what the needs are or what equity could look like. We have some resources at the state level. I think the health and all policy that has been at the state level for a few years is an example of an approach that looks more holistically at how government policies affects lives in general. I think the idea would be to take that and look at that and see if it has some applicability when we try to address it to the inequities that we see, whether it's racial or income disparities that we see around our region.
All right, we're starting to run a little short on time, so I think we have time for one more question. We have had some questions from from some of the attendees, not all of which we were able to answer, but thank you for putting them in. Also want to make sure that everybody is aware of the chat, where there have been lots of questions, answers, comments, and suggestions. For my last question, I want to ask both of you to speak to the attendees of this panel. If I am a community leader, a government official, or a business owner, what things can I be doing right now to raise awareness among my staff, my constituency, my associates, and what steps can I be taking to affect change?
Yeah, go ahead, Kome, and I'll
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, I think there's some basic things. First of all, and it was mentioned earlier on in one of the earlier panels, I think we have to each commit to some personal education about the issues. You would be surprised how much you learn about the issue once you start to focus on it, and having that respect for the gravity of the issue. We like to think in our work that when we say we want to affect all lives, that we are in fact affecting all lives equitably. But now understanding that maybe our structure, our framework, current framework, is built on a flawed premise that actually perpetuates the old inequities anyway. And so thinking through that, having that personal growth and organizational growth in understanding just how we affect the structure of inequities out there, I think is important. So I think that's, to me, that would be one of the first investments of time that you want to see, is just that personal growth and personal understanding of what the issues are. And there's data around to show that. We've shown, you see this data thrown around all over the place about the inequities between Black lives and whites in terms of income disparity, in terms of educational attainment, in terms of health indicators. These are all known data. The question is understanding what the structure is, or what the structural or systemic reasons are for that data, so that we can begin to find ways to correct them.
Frank, just quickly, because I know that we're almost out of time, I'll go back to something that Margarita Luna had mentioned in the prior panel, which is looking at census, right? On census, we actually saw our communities come together, businesses, nonprofits, governments, advocates, because it was actually very simple and clear. Every person represented $2,000 a year projected over 10 years, right? It was an amazing moment. I think we need to continue on with that spirit, right? To see our residents for the assets that they are, that they're not just $2,000, but they are really, really important, right? In terms of visioning for what we need ahead. We need to see our community partners for the experts that they are. We relied on them in order to do the outreach and to understand community at a very intimate level. But I think that's where businesses also need to come in. One thing I'll say is a project that our center is involved in our region, and we would encourage, we're actually going to be doing a national webinar next month to try to encourage regions across the country to do this, is to use census tables as a foundation for long range and inclusive regional planning for the next decade, so that we are stronger by 2030, not just in terms of census preparedness, but just stronger, period. And so this is called IE Rise. It's the Inland Empire Roadmap for an Inclusive and Sustainable Economy. Even though the word equity isn't in there, equity is there throughout the plan. You can go to ierise.org. And we were very fortunate that our census partners had thought about this at the beginning of the year, so that by the time Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and this movement for racial justice hit, we were prepared. But it's not too late, right? Census is going to end. The enumeration is going to end in the end of September. We would strongly encourage regions, census tables across the country, including funders, but also including businesses, to continue being engaged. Some of that work might be messy, but it's going to be such necessary work to advance racial equity in a collaborative manner.
Thank you, Karthick. Thank you, Kome. We're just about at the end of our time. We'll have a closing thought and next steps in just a second. But first, I want to thank everybody who participated. Pastor Casey, Councilwoman Jacinto, Councilman Richardson, and Margarita Luna. Thank you all very much for taking your time and present for us today. And thanks to all of you who attended. Also, thanks Sam and Deepa for moderating. And now I'll turn over back to you, Karthick. Let's talk a little bit about what comes next and a closing thought if you have it.
Well, thank you to everyone, including everyone in the audience. It's been a very active chat session. You know, I don't want to read too much into polls, especially a snap poll like that, for example, but I think it was very telling. For example, what I remember is that you know, criminal justice is a major area of focus. So Frank, I think we should absolutely be flagging that as a topic. And I know the news group has been doing some investigative journalism, or at least I think part of a larger investigative journalism project. So that might be an area. Housing, that's something that's coming up more and more, and the kind of the historic racial disparities there. But that's going to be the next step, is to dig deeper into some of these issues. And we hope to continue this kind of partnership with SCAG to make sure that even as jurisdictions and SCAG goes through that process heading into the May General Assembly next year, that we can offer this kind of forum that brings together philanthropy, journalism, researchers, and the broader community to make sure that this is a collective effort and not just something that government itself is expected to do.
I think clearly it does need to be a collective effort. I'm very pleased to be part of this effort and to have the newspaper involved in a virtual forum like this, as well as the Southern California Policy Forum. I think that definitely in coming weeks and months, we'll convene additional events. We'll also make available some space in our publications to continue this conversation and try to build better, stronger, healthier, more inclusive and diverse communities.
And Frank, thanks also. I mean, I'm already seeing it in the news coverage too, right? I mean, I think in many ways, as you see these resolutions passing, it becomes a kind of virtuous cycle, because then when you see the news coverage and you see who are the leaders in government and who are the community leaders that are making this possible, but then also making sure to follow up later on, right? So that it's not just a one and done kind of thing. You know, like Kome said, this is going to be a years-long process. And I think now more than ever, local and regional journalism to make sure that we continue and stay along those tracks, I think would be critical.
Thank you. And we're definitely having those conversations inside the newsroom. I'm glad you're seeing it in our pages and on our website, because we're certainly pursuing those stories, and we're talking every day about what we should be covering, how we should be covering it, and certainly in these extraordinary times, our priorities are shifting as well away from some of the things that we've traditionally covered to make sure that we're writing the right stories and having a positive impact on the communities that we cover.
Kome, I don't know if you have any final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think I just want to reiterate the point that's been made over and over again as we've been talking all morning about the fact that we need to recognize and accept that this inequities that we're talking about today did not happen accidentally. They have been in place from the beginning of time. I think Rex sort of alluded to that earlier on. And so the time that it's going to take for us to unseat the ingrained systemic inequities, I think it's something that we need commitment to. One, personal commitment, and agency commitment. You will see at SCAG that we're embarking on a long-term discussion first in the year that Rex is going to be president, where we listen, convene, and catalyze. Part of that is to use the social equity, the social equity committee to have that conversation publicly. That brings both external and internal discussions about how equity needs to look at SCAG, look from SCAG's perspective into the fore. And so I think we would hope to have you all join in those conversations as well. So I'm encouraged by what Frank said about having the ongoing conversations in the newsrooms, because we need to keep this in the forefront. And I think that's always been a concern, that it would be a flash in the pan type discussion because of the death of George Floyd, and that was going to go away, because we've seen this flashes before where an unarmed Black man was killed and there was some concern and then it went away. I think we are committed at this time to not let that momentum die off until we begin to see evidence that there is some change in solving the equity or inequities that we see in society.
I think that's a wrap.
And again, I want to thank what's that?
I said, I think that's a wrap. We're at time.
Yep.
So.
I want to again thank everybody for participating. We did record this, and we will send out a link to the recording to everybody who participated or attended. So be on the lookout for that. And with that, thank you all very much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll hope to see you around.
Thank you.